This is Martin Giles of the Guildford Dragon News, and I'm outside the Labour Party office in Guildford, which is serving as their campaign headquarters, and I'm about to go in and interview their candidate in the general election, Anne Rouse. Anne, thank you for giving your time to this interview with the Guildford Dragon. Now, this general election, seems to be wide open here in Guildford. Anne Milton's decision to stand as an independent will probably split the Conservative vote. But the Lib Dems, with their straightforward pro-Remain stance, will be attractive for those for whom remaining in the EU is the most important thing. Do you really think you can win here in Guildford as a Labour candidate?
I think Labour has a good chance everywhere they stand, because the one strength that we have over the other parties is that we're not just talking about Brexit, we're not just talking about leave or remain, we're talking about social care policies, education, health. And I think as a community in Guildford, when I go round and speak to people, they actually really want to know what we're going to do for our young people, what we're going to do for our older people. So for me, I think there's more to Guildford than there is Brexit. Okay. And so I think if people sit down, read the manifestos of all the party, Guildford will seem, for Labour, a very attractive option.
Now, we'll come on to Brexit, but one of the issues that young people in particular are engaged with is the climate emergency. So what emergency action? Because at the moment, I don't sense although we've declared a climate emergency in many areas, we don't seem to be taking emergency action. What would a Labour government take? What action would a Labour government take?
Well, first of all, let me say to you that I absolutely agree that we don't seem to be taking any action. And I think that's partly because the limit is set as having zero carbon emissions by 2050. And I think what we've seen all along with the Conservative government is that they will kick those kind of options down the road. And I don't believe that if it hadn't have been for Extinction Rebellion, we'd even be talking about it. I commend the young people of Guildford, I think, and all over the country. I think the fact that they're making a nuisance of themselves has brought climate emergency to the forefront, and it is important. And obviously, the Labour Party has got some strong policies on climate emergency. We're talking about making 22,000 new homes actually zero carbon from day one of being built. We're talking about having free loans for people, interest-free loans, so they can buy electric cars, and improving the facilities for charging those cars around the country, because they're pretty poor at the moment. You go into a car park in Guildford, how many charging points are there? Are there any? I don't know. The other thing is they're introducing 320,000 green apprenticeships. So that's to encourage people to work in industry where they can improve the environment. So I think they're all really strong policies. And I think that we need to be grateful. Like we were for the suffragettes, for women getting the vote, we need to be grateful for young people. This is their future. And we need to take it seriously, and we need to take action now.
But doesn't it really need quite dramatic action? For instance, how can we cut down on our use of cars and encourage people onto public transport, which is less environmentally damaging?
Well, one of the things that we want to do is introduce a green transport system. But I always look at countries like Sweden, where people in Sweden think it's absolutely normal not to use their car. They use local tram services, they use bus services. And what we need to do is get people to change their mentality. They always think, oh, no, we shouldn't drive. We shouldn't drive into Guildford. We shouldn't get our shopping there. But if you try and get a bus into Guildford from the external car parks on a weekend or a bank holiday Monday, they don't run. And that has to be a major mistake. We're trying to keep our town centres alive. We're trying to encourage people to come in and look after the local community and spend their money in the local community. And then we're not providing those bus services.
OK, but that would require subsidy, wouldn't it, to have more regular...
Of course it would require subsidy. But what's wrong with that? I don't understand why people are so anti-investment in that. You can't say on the one hand, we want to improve the green environment, but on the other hand, we don't want to pay anything for it. You know, we just want things to stay as they are.
So you'd raise taxes?
Sorry?
So you'd raise taxes to finance that?
I think the Labour Party have said from day one they're going to raise taxes. I don't have an issue with that. I know a lot of people talk about raising taxes on corporation tax from 19% to 26%. I think it's really interesting that Boris Johnson admires the German economy so much, but corporation tax levels in Germany are 29.6%. In France, they're in the 30%. In Portugal, they are. We need to say to people, if you want an environment, if you want a society that's decent for decent people to live in, for everybody to have a fair shot, it's got to be paid for, not just in taxes, in investment as well. But I honestly don't meet people on the street who say, whoa, I don't want to pay any more taxes. You know, we're talking about 5 pence on income over 40,000, 80,000, 120,000. Young people aspire to earn that kind of money. You know, we need to do something to actually pay for their opportunities.
Okay, now let's move on to Brexit. You're a Remainer.
I voted Remain.
Yes. And you still a Remainer?
I would prefer to stay in the EU, but I'm a Democrat.
Okay, so what do you say to those who find the Labour policy of negotiating a new deal, which many in your party, Keir Starmer, Emily Thornberry, John McDonnell, Diane Abbott, have already said that they will campaign against? What would you do?
Well, as I said to you, I'm a Democrat. We voted to leave, but it's become clear that nobody can resolve the issue of whether we leave or remain. I dislike the fact that the main bulk of Tories are happy to leave without a deal, but I also dislike the fact that the Lib Dems are saying we're going to revoke Article 50. I think it's sensible to negotiate a better deal, one that protects the Good Friday Agreement, one that actually protects our workers' rights and jobs in the UK. And I think once we've seen that deal, then we need to decide whether or not it's a deal we can support. I think Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party are actually giving people a straight choice. Look at our deal. If it's a good deal and you want to leave, vote for that deal. If you passionately want to remain, then you vote for Remain. I can't tell you until I see that deal how I would vote personally. And frankly, I don't think it matters how I would vote personally. I think the only way we can bring the country together is to say to people, you have the opportunity now, use it.
Okay, and what would you say to your colleague Emily Thornberry, for instance, who was raised here in Guildford? Do you think she's wrong to make a decision now? Do you think she should wait to see what the deal is?
I don't know the question that was raised or how she actually answered that she would campaign for Remain. I know there are passionate Remainers in the Labour Party, and I'm not going to criticise anybody who says that. I can only answer for me. And I have an enormous amount of respect for Emily Thornberry, really have, and I'd love to see her as the Foreign Secretary in this country. If she wants to vote to Remain, that's her decision to make. I can't make that decision until I see the deal.
Okay, and if we are to have a proper democratic choice, shouldn't there also be an option that for people that actually do want a no-deal Brexit?
I think if people want a no-deal Brexit, they'll be voting for the party that supports a no-deal Brexit. All I can say to you is I agree with the Labour Party position. I think we need a deal. We shouldn't leave without a deal. The CBI thinks it would be disastrous if we actually left without a deal. Lots of the people that I work with, small businesses, would think it would be disastrous to leave without a deal. I don't think anybody thinks that's a good idea.
Okay, now let's move on to immigration. If Labour win, will free movement between the EU and the UK continue or not?
I think it will continue. I think we've stated it will continue. I don't think that's a negative thing. I think it's a positive thing. One of the things I love about living in this country is the vibrancy of all the different populations that we have here. I think it's to our great credit. When I first moved to Guildford 30 years ago, I was really concerned about the huge number of white people that lived here. I didn't want my daughters being brought up in a community where they didn't see any ethnic diversity. I'm very proud of the fact that they actually don't notice people by the colour of their skin, but by the fact that they value their opinions and form their judgments and friendships based on that. I don't have an issue with immigration.
But racism isn't necessarily linked with immigration policy, is it?
I think it is. I think the campaign in the 2016 referendum to stay in the EU or not to stay in the EU was wholly racist. I think some of the Mail headlines saying 3 million Turkish people are going to come over to the UK if we stay in is racist.
Right.
So
But do you think everyone that voted Leave was convinced by that argument or had those sentiments in their heart?
I can't tell you. I didn't vote Leave. I can say influenced a lot of people. I can say when you're on the doorstep talking to people, I think there's an element of that. I think when you say to people then, well, what about the people who look after our older generation in care homes or as nurses and doctors? What about them? And they then say, oh, well, they're okay. So, I mean, I think the thing that saddens me most about the 2015 referendum is the fact...
2016.
2016 referendum is the fact that it's made racism and racist remarks more acceptable than it was before. And that upsets me enormously.
Right. Can you think of an instance where that's happened locally, a racist remark?
I can think of personal things where that's happened, but, you know, not on a massive local scale.
Okay. Now, let's move on to, no, before we leave immigration, will immigration go up or down under a Labour government?
I have no idea. I mean, I'd like to think that however immigration moves under a Labour government, it's going to be in a fair way. It distresses me enormously when you see people who have children in other countries and they desperately are trying to get them to come in and live with their families, and they have to go through the most stringent policies and applications and forms and money, prove they're earning $18,000 a year before they come. I just think it's incredibly sad that we don't value families, because people do. And I think that immigration is a real benefit to this country. I can't tell you whether it will go up or down under a Labour government. I just know I think it's a good thing.
But don't you think as a government you need to know, you need to plan? If you're going to have a number of people moving in, or the population increasing by a certain percentage, planning has to go on, doesn't it? We have to have the GPs, the teachers, the extra road space. All those things have to be planned.
Yes, but wouldn't it be lovely if we had the GPs, the doctors and the road space now? And if it wasn't for the immigrants that are working here in the National Health Service, we wouldn't have a National Health Service. I think it's very easy to put fear-mongering in. We've said we're going to increase housing and infrastructure, improve that. But that's for the benefit of everybody, whether they're here now or they're coming here. I think from my perspective that we need to desperately increase doctors now. We need to desperately increase teachers in schools, people that are qualifying as teachers, who actually now find that they're more administrators when they get into schools. We need to look at all those aspects and say, okay, you know, this is for the benefit of everybody.
So you
here.
don't see a capacity issue either in Guildford Borough or the country with population?
Has it ever been a capacity issue? I mean, if you really put your hand on your heart...
We've never had this level of population before.
Yeah, and it's not an issue now, is it? I mean, I think maybe you would call me naive, I don't know. But I think immigrants that have come here don't come here to scrounge off the system. I think they come here and they add something to our society. Okay.
Now, moving on to the local plan, we have a controversial local plan adopted in Guildford, which was adopted, one of the last things the last administration did at Millmead. Do you think it was democratic for that council to impose this plan on the current administration?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because when I was in the hustings for the Guildford Borough Council elections, this question came up then. And I think the frustration was that nothing was happening on the local plan. I do understand that normally you wouldn't impose a local plan on an incoming borough council. And I know there's been a judicial review about it. But actually what we need to do is get the local plan sorted so we can move forward with housing development in Guildford.
But in a way, it has been sorted, that unless the judicial review
Yeah.
finds against it, the Liberal Democrat administration is following the local plan.
Yeah.
It has to.
And the Labour councillors voted in favour of it too.
Right. So you think that's fine?
I think it is what it is. I think we can't go back and change it. There's a judicial review now. The outcome of that judicial review will actually say whether it's legitimate or not. And I think we have to wait for that. I don't think it's worth speculating over. I think we need to wait and see what the outcome of the review is.
Okay, so the 10 to 14,000 extra homes in Guildford, you're in favour of those homes being built?
I am in favour of extra homes in Guildford. I think it's a really sad situation that I've got 2 children, and when it came to them leaving home, there was never an option for them to stay in Guildford, not only because of the financial cost of staying in Guildford, but there aren't homes available. I've got friends and colleagues in private rented accommodation with no security of tenure. And I just think it's a shame. We need housing. I really don't understand. I think people say it's about the green belt. I think there's plenty of brownfield sites. I think when you look at Guildford, you look at people who are land banking, who have got land that they've bought with planning permission, and they're not building on that land. They're using that as an asset to sell on. I think that's outrageous. And I think what we should do is actually say to them, if you don't build those houses within 3 years, you lose the planning permission, and that value of that land would then go down. I just disagree with the way the planning system works now.
Okay, I think probably that would attract wide agreement on the brownfield.
I hope so.
But on the greenbelt, it's more controversial, isn't it?
It is.
And once you've used it, you've used it. You can't turn it back to a field easily.
Yeah.
And what happens when we get to the end of this planning period and we still have the same problem? Because you're not looking to control the population of the country. So are we just going to give up more greenbelt then?
I think there's a lot of land that's called greenbelt, which actually you or I could go and see and think, wow, this is greenbelt. It doesn't look like greenbelt. It looks more like a brownfield site. I think the definition of greenbelt is really overused, and I think particularly in an area like this it's overused.
Okay.
But if you look at areas where there is no green belt, we're going to have to develop housing in there, and what we need to do is look at other ways of increasing housing. For example, I went to a really interesting meeting on Friday, which was where they were discussing a project in Islington, where what they're doing is they're building accommodation for people, homes for people, on top of shops and things like that.
Okay, I'm sorry, but Islington isn't greenbelt, is it? I'm talking about the greenbelt.
No.
And you say that there are unattractive areas of greenbelt, but if I think of Blackwell Farm, Wisley, these aren't unattractive areas of greenbelt.
No, I agree, but Wisley was an airfield, wasn't it? And it wasn't...
Part of it was.
Yeah. And it wasn't wholly greenbelt there.
No.
So I think, you know, it's a perfect example of what I'm saying to you about it's more brownfield in a way than greenbelt. And I think housing in that area, if we can put the infrastructure in place, because obviously some of those roads around Wisley aren't very good. And I haven't seen the plans. I'm not au fait with what it looks like, the finished project, but I have no problem with building there.
Okay, so it sounds to me like you don't agree with the current greenbelt policy then.
Which current?
Well, that you meant to prove exceptional circumstances before you build on it.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think that's absolutely fine.
Okay, but for you, housing shortage is sufficient.
Housing shortage is sufficient.
Okay. Now, on the Solent redevelopment, the redevelopment of Guildford Railway Station, what do you think of that?
I know there's been a lot of arguments against the actual, the look of the solar project. I think what upsets me is the fact that they talked about having a higher percentage of affordable housing in there, which is being nibbled away at. I don't like the fact that planning people can come from outside the area and dictate what they think is acceptable planning. And I know British Rail was involved in sort of that whole project, but I don't think it's right for Guildford. And I do think that we should say to our planning officials in Guildford, you decide what's the best and appropriate housing that we have, not somebody from outside coming in and making that decision for us.
Okay, so if you're elected on December the 12th, what will you do about it?
About the Solent project. Well, I think obviously if I'm elected, what I would do is actually try and negotiate on behalf of the people of Guildford for what they actually want to see there.
So would you ask the Minister of Transport to pull the plug on it? Because I think he can. He's Network Rail are part of the consortium that are building it.
I think the only way, I mean, I always believe in consensus, and I do believe that if we can pull the plug on it and relook at the issue and have something that's more appropriate to Guildford, I would definitely campaign for that.
Okay, so we're imagining now that you have been elected in December. How would you ensure that constituents here will be fully informed about what you're doing as the MP?
One of the things that I'm really sad about is since I've lived in Guildford, I've never known where to go to speak to my MP, whoever they were. And I do think it's important that we have an office space somewhere in Guildford or Cranley or both, where people can come and actually speak to their MP face to face. I think it's important. You go to some towns in the country and you see that. I used to work in Kingston, and on the way to Kingston in Surbiton, there was a Conservative shop there where people could go in and talk. I think that's really hugely important. Okay. We should be accessible to the community. And
will you be a delegate or a representative of Guildford when you're in the House of Commons? Will you express what you determine to be the majority view of the constituency, or will you follow your own conscience on issues?
I think you have to follow the majority view. If you've been elected, it means you've got the majority of votes. But I would hope that I was being elected on the views that I stand for. So if people actually vote for me, it would be because they agree with the way I think and the way I feel.
But new issues can arise, can't they?
They can. And I think what you have to do is sometimes use your initiative, sometimes use your conscience, and sometimes you have to go back to the constituents and say, this has happened. I was a chair of governors for a lot of years at a local school, and I think I was a parent governor originally, and it was made quite clear to me that although I was there as a representative of the parents, I wasn't there necessarily to represent the parents. You have to try and have people that look after you who you think will do the decent thing.
Okay, but it sounds a confused answer to me. I'm not clear whether you're going to be a representative or a delegate.
A representative.
Okay, so you will make up your own mind regardless of how the majority of people in Guildford feel? No.
What I'm saying is that if people vote for me, then the majority will agree with how I feel anyway.
Okay, but if new issues arise, how will you sense what the majority view is?
It depends on the issues. I think it's actually a really difficult question to answer, and I think anybody that could give you a straight answer than that is probably not thinking it through. I'm quite a thoughtful person, and I would have to base it on the issues that came up at the time.
Okay, and Rouse, thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin.